Welcome, everyone, to the Santa Clara County Library District's program tonight in partnership with the Master Gardeners. Tonight's program is on how to save money and the environment with Waterwise gardening techniques. Our speaker tonight is Anita Rosen. Anita has lived in Silicon Valley for over 30 years. 12 years ago, Anita became a master gardener. Sustainable gardens, beekeeping, and flower gardens have been of special interest to her. With the effects of climate change and the drought, Anita has taken special interest in what we can do around our homes to conserve water while maintaining a beautiful garden. We have many resources at the library on how to have a water-wise or a drought-tolerant garden. And when we send out the recording link later on, I will send out a link to a book list where you can reserve library books. I did want to mention that we are now open for lobby service at all the county libraries. That means you can pick up your holds yourself and also do a little bit of browsing in one area. Most of the libraries have like a special part of the lobby open with some browsing available. So drop by and check us out. The hours remain the same. One little bit of housekeeping I have to do before we get going. I'm going to read the photo video release. This session is being recorded, but since everyone's cameras are off, your image is not being recorded. But just to satisfy all the lawyers, the photo video release form reads in part, I hereby consent and grant permission to Santa Clara County Library District to record statements, photographs, and/or audio or video footage of me for the purposes of library education, promotional materials, publications, or other purposes as determined by Santa Clara County Library District. I waive any rights of compensation or ownership to the recordings. So, this recording is solely for educational purposes. We're recording it on Zoom, and then the link will be sent out to everyone who registered for the program, so that they can get the benefit of the information. That's all. So I will now turn my video off, and I will turn it over to our speaker, Anita.
Thank you. I assume everyone can hear me. And welcome. A little bit about Master Gardeners. I'm a Master Gardener. It's a UC program. And how I like to tell people, most people are familiar with 4-H. So it's kind of 4-H for adults. And it's out of UC Davis. And our mission is to provide UC based information to the general public. And we do that. We have a bunch of different services on how we do it. We have a hotline, we have a website, we have monthly email, we have demonstration and research gardens, and we have events, not since the pandemic, of our spring garden market, but hopefully those will resume soon. And then like today, we provide speakers for classes and talks. And there's more information. If you go to our website, you can get all of these links to YouTube, and we're on Facebook and Instagram, all different ways that we can try to get information to you about gardening. So today's session is saving money by using less water. What this course does cover is better watering techniques, better landscaping techniques, cool tricks to save water, and how to make smart decisions in your garden. What we will not cover today is water-wise plants, which plants to use, and how to set up a drip irrigation system. So the first thing is we have a unique climate, but not completely unique. There's some other places that have a climate like us. Israel and Australia are two of them. And what I see is commercial growers can teach us backyard gardeners a lot of information. Australia and Israel, the almond growers use 15% as much water to grow the same crop as California almond growers. And that's because we don't, in our almond groves in the Central Valley, water is free and there's a lot of flood irrigation going on. And what we have unique that is Israel and Australia doesn't have is the Sierras. So we have this wonderful way of getting more water. I attended a conference a few years ago by the Santa Clara Water District, and they had the head of water for Israel spoke. And what he told us was 40% of the water that Israel needs comes naturally, which means they have 60% shortfall every year. So they have to be smart because they don't have the Sierras. So 40% comes naturally. They get another 30% from desalination, and they actually produce 150% of the water they need by reusing water, constantly reusing. All the water is saved and reused. So they are actually selling water. That's one piece of it. The other piece is how they use water. So in Australia and Israel, if you use flood irrigation in Australia, it's a felony. It's considered ecoterrorism to use flood techniques. So what they do use for techniques in these other places is mulch, drip irrigation, and probes and satellites. So you only water when the tree needs it. So the first step, if we want to be water wise in our area, water wise is saving money. A lot of people don't think about it as saving our environment. So that's me. And I'm doing a really simple task in my yard. I think the most amount of time spent was going into my garage and finding a 5-gallon bucket. So you take the 5-gallon bucket and you turn on your hose and you see how long does it take to fill that bucket with water. And that's a real basic thing, but most people don't know how fast their water is coming out. So it's just one of those basic, how much water do you need? Well, how much water is coming out questions. So for example, if your fill time is a minute, the flow rate is 5 gallons per minute. So it takes probably from the time you find your bucket and come into your yard, put it down and turn on the water, it's a couple of minutes, a really easy task to do, but it's a good basis of information in your yard is to know how much water is coming out of your hose. So I have a question for the group. Has anyone measured their water flow? Do you know what your water flow is? And if you could, if we can't see you, so you can't raise your hand, if you could go over to the chat and tell us yes or no, have you measured your water? That would be really beneficial. And then we will know whether or not you're already doing a basic task. So Louise, are people?
Yep, we're getting a lot of answers, and I haven't seen any yeses yet, but I've seen, well, there's someone who says some. Someone who says, I have never thought to do it.
Yeah, a lot of people haven't thought to do it, but you know, you might have great water flow in the front and terrible water flow in back. And we'll get into why you need to know these things. So I'll move on. We have one didn't think of doing it, and everyone else is no, never did it. So it's very easy to do. And then you have this water and you can use it to water your plants. So the question is really how much should I water? A lot of people have no idea how much water should they be giving the plants. Because if you give them too much water, they're not happy, number one. And number two, you're wasting water. So you want to give them the right amount of water. So first thing to understand is annual rainfall in Santa Clara County is 18 inches. So we don't have a lot of water coming in. And we're currently at about 45% of normal. And here we are in March. So I don't think we're going to hit 100% of normal this year. So we really need to protect our water sources. And so that's the side of conserving. So to get back to our gardens and to know how much is the right amount is what we recommend is 1 inch of water per week for vegetables in the summer. So 1 inch is 2/3 of a gallon. So that's how much your vegetables need. And you more obviously in hot water. And if you're in, I don't know of any really arid areas in Santa Clara County. If you're in an arid area, you'll need to have more. So it's really dependent on your area. But if you know it's about 1 inch per week, that's your baseline. So what we use with this baseline is, this is a 4 by 16 foot vegetable garden, which means it's 64 square feet. And if the water flow rate is 5 gallons per minute, and I need 2/3 of a gallon per square foot, what I need to use to water this 64 square foot garden is 40 gallons of water a week. That's how much my garden needs. So if I have my hose, which we typically will not do, but if I had my hose on full blast, it would take me 8 minutes to hand water my garden. Don't recommend doing it that way. There's better ways of doing it. So most of us are not hand watering. We're using a drip irrigation system. If we're using a drip irrigation system, oh, and to go back, if you don't have a drip irrigation system, then turn the water on as high as you usually use to water your garden and see how long it takes for the 5 gallons. So then you know how long you need to water to give your garden, for this example, the 40 gallons. So if you have a drip irrigation system, what you can do is take, and you use a 1/2 gallon per hour drip emitter, and you need 2/3 of a gallon of water per square foot, how long does it take? So if you water every day, you'll need to run your sprinkler for 12 minutes a day. If you water 3 times a week, you'll need to run your sprinkler for 30 minutes. If you water twice a week, you'll need to run your sprinkler for 45 minutes. And if you water once a week, you'll need to run your sprinkler for 1.5 hours. And I say sprinkler, but drip irrigation system. And how deep it goes, how deep that water goes, is really dependent on what type of soil we have. If it's sandy, it's going to go much deeper. If it's clay, it will probably be wider, but not as deep. Santa Clara County, I can't talk for the entire county, but we are blessed here. We have, a lot of people think we have clay soil. As a master gardener, when I was in my training year, we all tested our garden, and everyone in the room, which was from all over the county, had somewhere halfway in between sandy and clay. So we have gorgeous soil here. So we're very lucky. So what we want to do, so now you have an idea of how long you need to run your sprinkler so your plants get the right amount of water. So what are the common mistakes we make is we water every day for a short period of time, and the water doesn't sink deeper than the surface. So the roots will grow close to the surface. Deep watering encourages deep roots. Shallow watering creates evaporation. So what we want to do with our plants is we want to grow our plants so their roots are really deep, because there's more water the deeper you go. And so how do we get more water to our plants? Using the same amount of water, but making sure that the plants get this water. We don't want to have runoff, and we don't want to have water not being used by the plants, because that's just a waste. So here's a picture of a tree that is not too far from my house, and they're watering the grass, and you can see all the roots on the surface. And that's because this tree is being trained that there's a lot of short amount of water on the surface. So if you see roots on the surface, then you know that tree has accommodated to getting lots of shallow water. Their roots aren't deep. And a lot of places where you see trees and grass, there's no reason to have grass. This is in an apartment complex a couple blocks from my house. I have never, in the 15 years I've lived in my house, I have never seen someone sitting on that grass or walking across the grass. They would be much better served if they didn't have grass and use any water over there, and they just deep watered the trees periodically, than all the shallow watering for grass that's not being used. So this is what it looks like if you have shallow watering techniques on a tree. So for deep watering, to get a little deeper into how we actually deep water, is if you have a drip irrigation system, your controller, typically they're set, factory set for 5 minutes a day. And that's a really it's not a good setting. It's not an efficient setting. So if it's along the left side, I have depth. These numbers really don't mean anything because it's really dependent on what kind of soil you have, on how deep the water goes, but this is just kind of giving you an idea. If you have your water go for 5 minutes, it might go, in this scale is 5 inches, and then as it sits, the water will go maybe another 5 inches deep. If you water for 15 minutes, it will go deeper because you spent 10 more minutes watering. But really what you want to do is you want to cycle. So the best way of watering is, if you're going to be watering for 15 minutes, you water for 5 minutes, you turn off for 15 minutes, you water another 5 minutes, you turn off for 15 minutes, you do another 5 minutes. And what that does is each time you cycle, it goes maybe 5 inches deep. And then as it sits, it percolates down and you're not watering. And then you come back and water, and now it can go a little bit deeper. And then as it's off, it can percolate down. So this is how we can get really deep, is we cycle on and off, and that lets the water go deeper. A question comes up about seedlings. Well, seedlings have really small roots. So when we first start out, seedlings will need the same amount of water, but we don't have to worry about deep watering initially. While they're really small, we don't want to, deep watering isn't going to help them because their roots aren't down deep. So we initially start off watering shallow, and as they grow, we start watering deeper because we want to train their roots to go deep. So it's better to water less often and deeper than more often and shallow. You'll grow the roots deeper, and you'll wind up, for the same amount of water, you'll give a better job of watering your plants. So I'm curious, is anyone out there managing their water usage to grow deep roots, cycling their system on and off, or if they're hand watering, walking around giving some water, and then maybe making 3 trips around their garden to give water, so that each time they hand water, it goes a little bit deeper. So if you can go over to the chat and tell me, I'm curious to know if anyone is cycling. And if
yes, some people are saying that. Some people are saying no. We have some no, some yes. At our school garden, I let the kids water, then I follow behind them and water again.
And you didn't realize you were cycling.
So it looks like some people are and some people are not, okay. But people are trying, it looks like.
Okay, good. I'm always kind of curious how many people have heard about cycling and they understand why we cycle. So there's a few other tips that make a difference. The best time to water is early in the morning. It conserves water by reducing evaporation caused by sun and wind. You don't want to be watering in the midday. You're going to get a lot of evaporation. You don't also want to be watering in the early evening or before midnight, because you don't want water sitting on your plants, because you could now have created a conductive, friendly environment for fungus and mold. So the best time is to water is right around sunrise, maybe a little before sunrise. Most plants like the soil to dry out between watering. A lot of times we get really caught up in making sure that the water, the ground, the earth is always wet. So cycling, going every 3 days, is probably happier for plants than watering them every day. And we should think about making sure that we turn off our water in the beginning of November. I have dogs. I walk around my neighborhood and it makes me crazy when I see people, it's raining outside and they're watering their lawn. Another element when we're setting up our drip irrigation system is what's called water budgeting. And what that is planting like plants together. So plants that have the same kind of watering needs together. So you can plant all of your California natives in a California native garden because they don't want to be watered in the winter. Frankly, once they're established, California native plants don't want to be watered at all. They're fine with our long, warm summers, and they do all of their growing in the winter. We also, over at UC A&R, we have a tool that you can use to identify appropriate plants so that if you're looking at planting, which plants should be planted together, because you want to have similar watering needs together. Another element is our trees that we need to be thinking about for watering. We have long, hot summers, June, July, August, and it hasn't rained in a long time. So we have to look at what type of trees we have to see, do some of our trees need deep watering? And if you have California native trees, no, they don't need deep watering. They're fine with our long, dry summers. Though we do need to be careful because we're not getting enough rain in the winter, which means these plants aren't getting enough water over the winter. And I just recently read that 30% of the trees in the Bay Area are in high level of distress because they're not getting 30% of our trees are high level of distress because they're not getting enough water. So what we need to be looking at is, do you have trees, especially if they're European trees or trees from back east that aren't used to our California, it doesn't matter how many generations they've been here, genetically, they are not used to our California weather. And those trees are the ones that probably July, August time, they need some deep watering. We don't want it to be shallow watering. We want it to be really deep down because the water stays for a long time. So what we do is, you can see in this illustration, there's a drip line right at the end of the canopy. And we take three and make a triangle with 3 different points. And we do a trickle of water, just a little teeny bit of water, and we lay it down at those points for about 1 to 3 hours. What we want to do is provide about 5 gallons per point. And we do 3 different points, so we're going to give them about 15 gallons. We let the water go really deep, so it's a little teeny trickle. And what you can do is take like a 1 gallon can and see how long it takes with just a little bit of a trickle to fill up a 1 gallon can. If it takes 5 minutes, then probably you want it to be less than that. It's going to be to get your 5 gallons. You want to have it will be 15 minutes, which means your trickle is too big. So we want to have something that it would take 5 gallons, about 1 to 3 hours. So really small little trickle of water so that it goes super deep. So also controllers, if you have drip irrigation, you probably have a controller. If you have a smart controller, all of the stuff that we're talking about with the cycling on and off is super easy. So you can also get probes. And some of the smart controllers are connected to our weather systems. So if it's supposed to rain, they'll turn it off. If we're going to have a hot spell, it might give you an alert, or so that you need to water more often or longer. So how many people have a controller or a smart controller? They're not hand watering, they're actually using a controller. And if you have any other questions, you can put them in the chat section.
Looks like we have a few people who do have one and a few people who don't, or don't have any controller. I do have a controller, but not smart.
Yeah.
A timer on drip irrigation, but not necessarily smart.
The smart just makes it easier. It's
Anita,
on your PC or on your phone, and it's just easier to set all of this up. But I've had both. I now have a smart, and it's just easier, but I was able to set up cycles on my traditional controller before I got the smart controller.
Anita, we've had a couple people ask about the watering that you just described for trees. Should that apply to citrus trees also?
I don't believe so. I'd have to look it up to see which are the trees that need it and which ones are the ones that don't. But I don't believe citrus trees need the deep watering. But you know what? I don't feel comfortable. The reason I don't do plants is that's not my specialty. So what I would do when anyone asks me, and I can tell all of you what to do, is UC Davis has an amazing website that has all of that type of information. And especially when it comes to vegetables and everything, it's an Aggie school. So anything having to do with fruit and vegetables, they have lots of information. And if you put in your search engine, UC Davis watering citrus, it will come up and it will tell you exactly what you need to do. And you want to make sure it's UC Davis because you want to get California as opposed to getting Florida, because we have very different, they get a lot more rain in Florida than we get.
I just posted the home orchard link into the chat, so people can go there.
Perfect.
We have a couple other questions. Do you want to take some now, or do you want to wait?
Sure. I'm moving on to a different section, so this is perfect time to ask questions on the
one question is, if you have a tree with shallow roots like the one that you showed in that picture, how do you correct that problem?
You start watering deep and you stop watering shallow, because trees are really smart. Believe it or not. You don't think they're smart, but they are smart. If you start watering deep, you start doing deep watering, you stop all the shallow watering, they'll start growing their roots deep down to get that water because it's no longer on the surface. So you can train your trees to grow deep roots by putting the water deep. Because those trees, in the winter, there's plenty of water deep. But in the summer, the trees that I showed you, all summer long, it's getting, there's a sprinkler going on. So if you turn off the sprinkler, you get rid of your grass, you don't need to have grass under your tree, and you start just having deep water, the roots will go deep.
So should people replace all their sprinklers with drip?
Definitely. I'm not a big proponent of sprinklers. I'm going to get into grass and what we can do with our grass. But we really don't need to have grass by our trees. It's not healthy for the trees. And you really should look to see who's using your grass. And a lot of times, like sitting on the grass, do you need to have grass and trees together?
One other question before you move on. Someone asked about deep watering for potted plants. Do we cycle the watering for potted plants in the same way?
Not really, because how big is your pot? You probably pour the water into your pot, it comes down to the bottom, and then you see it in the dish below.
Okay.
So it really doesn't work the same way as plants that are in the earth. You don't need to be cycling them.
Okay.
Because if there's just so deep, your plants will go. But you want to make sure that it's coming out the bottom, because if the water is coming out the bottom, then the water has gone all the way through, because the top surface will be, it's going to evaporate. All the water from the surface will evaporate, especially in our summers.
Okay, I think that's all the questions for now. I'll hold a couple for the end.
Okay. So other ways of saving money. So right now we haven't talked yet about saving money. The first half of this presentation is just about making sure that we're using our water. It's costing us a lot of money to water our plants. Let's make sure we're efficiently watering our plants. So the first way to save money is what's called climate positive design. So climate positive design, there's a few things we're trying to do with climate positive design. We're trying to increase our green space, increase our large trees, and decrease heat sinks. So I'm going to get into what water sinks are and heat sinks are. But what we want to do is increase the green space in our yard. And the best way to lower the temperatures. One of the issues we've had in Santa Clara County is we used to be able to grow cherries, and we're having a hard time growing cherries because we have so much pavement in the valley now that our temperatures are warmer. So what we want to do is cool down the valley, and especially with global warming and droughts, all of these issues, we want to keep things cool. And we all know when we're walking down the street, we look for those trees, and it's probably 15 to 20 degrees cooler under a tree than it is in the middle of the street. So big trees cool down areas. So that's what we're looking at, is climate positive design is how do we cool down our neighborhoods? So one of the issues that we have is turf. We love our turf. And turf is an invasive species, especially to California. We grow European grasses and then back east grasses, and it's invasive to our California grasses. We use, according to the EPA, we use 9 billion gallons of water every day just to water grass. Our mowers consume 200 million gallons of gas, and most fertilizers are petroleum-based. So we're putting all of those contaminants into our yard, which runs off into our bay. And our lawn annual carbon footprint is about 25 million tons. So they're terrible for our environment. They create a monoculture that create a wasteland for butterflies and bird populations. So as you can see, I'm not pro turf. So then people say, well, what about fake turf? And they're like, it's wonderful. It's green and I don't have to water it. Well, that sounds like a good solution, except what you just created is a heat sink. It's rubber. You just put a big pad of rubber. It's really the only difference between a fake lawn and cement is instead of cement, you put rubber. It creates what it does. It creates water runoff because it's just a big sheet of rubber that you've put down. It kills healthy soil bacteria and worms. It's terrible for the trees because you just put a big pile of rubber around a tree. It's not recyclable. It's toxic. And we need to have bugs in our area for the birds to eat. 95% of the birds in the US eat bugs. And we've lost about 1/3 of our birds. So we're not creating a good environment for our birds either. So now I get all the grass lovers, but I love my beautiful green lawn in front of my house. Well, there is a third solution. We can get rid of these East Coast and European grasses and not put down fake lawn. And what you can now do is buy native sod. And native sod is wonderful. If you need to have your grass in front, put down native. You mow it. This is a picture from one of my neighbors' yards. They mow it twice a year. It uses 60% less water. You don't need to fertilize it. It increases bird and butterfly population because it's native. So it's good for our environment. It's not an invasive. And it stores more carbon in its deeper root system than the invasive European and East Coast grasses. And there's a bunch of different types. You can either buy plugs, which are little pots, and you might go past someone's house and they've just had them all lined up, all these little, plugs, or you can buy it in sod. From the same places that you buy sod, they also now have native mixes, and you could just lay a sod lawn. In my neighborhood, I watched two neighbors. One put plugs in, the other put sod in. It took about 2 years for the plugs to look the same as the sod. And they only mow it in the spring and the fall. That's it, twice a year. So much easier to take care of. It's green, and it's healthy. So if you're looking at replacing your lawn, an alternative is a native lawn. Also, if you put in sod, you don't get a rebate. But if you put in plugs, I'm not quite sure how much the rebate is. I think it's a $300 rebate from the Santa Clara Water District. So there's a great site, Santa Clara Water District, and there's all kinds of rebates they have for yards, for saving water. About 3-4 years ago, I pulled up all the grass in my yard, and I did not put in a native lawn. I put in native plants, and I got $1,200 from Santa Clara Water District. So just type in Santa Clara Water District rebate, and you'll get to a list of all the different rebates that you can get that are out there. So another thing to look at is drought tolerant gardens. I'm a flower lover. There's a lot of people that when they talk about gardening, what they're into are their vegetables. I like to eat vegetables, but what I really love are flowers. So, and what I try to plant are native flowers. Sometimes I have some South African flowers and some Australian flowers. But if we plant drought tolerant gardens, they use 83% less water. They generate 56% less green waste, and they require 68% less maintenance. That's from the Santa Clara Water District study. So they're easier to maintain, and they use a lot less water. I know we all like all of these East Coast and European flowers, but we have a lot of really pretty flowers also in California, and they're all starting to bloom right now. And we should really consider using drought tolerant gardens, because we can still get the pretty gardens, but really save our water. So I'm curious, have you or are you planning on getting rid of your invasive turf? Did you know that it was an invasive turf and that there was better alternatives out there?
This is great. So far, everybody has said yes, yes, gone a long time ago, Yay. Already gone, yes, removed. That sounds like a good idea. Lawn conversion. It's not necessarily practical right now. Yes, on replacing turf, but didn't know the alternatives. So this is interesting.
Great. I'm thrilled that there's so many people that are getting rid of their turf. I think it should be, I think for commercial real estate, they shouldn't have grass. I have never walked past a commercial building, like an office building, and seen an employee sitting on the grass. Not once in the 30 plus years I've lived in Silicon Valley. So we'd be much better off if all of our offices used California natives. It would be cheaper for them too. They don't have to have mow, blow, and go guys coming every week.
We did have a question about clover lawns. Are clover lawns environmentally friendly?
Well, I believe most of the clover lawns are California natives.
And so someone else has a question about a big dog. If you have a dog and you want a place for the dog to run around, maybe you could make a recommendation.
Well, I have two 80-pound dogs, so it really depends upon how old they are. When they were puppies, all we had was a mud pit because nothing grows with rambunctious dogs. But once they mellow out, the California natives behave the same way as the invasives. I don't believe they're poisonous to dogs because, you know, some dogs eat grass. So I don't know if that answered your question.
I think it does. Also, same thing for kids, right? If kids like to run around, the native grass lawn would be good for that.
Yeah, it would be the same. You know, you're not going to see necessarily native grass lawns on football fields or baseball diamonds. But then again, I don't know why not. Probably because they grow a little bit longer. You don't keep them really, really short like or golf courses. But beside that, I don't think just the typical kids running around is going to bother it at all. I look at my neighbors who have some little kids and they're out there playing on their native lawn.
Are you interested in talking about Carapia?
I don't know what Carapia is.
How about it's also Lipia. Lipia and Carapia are the same basic plant. They're a native California alternative also, as I understand it.
Okay, sorry, I'm not good.
No, that's fine. Someone asked about it, that's why.
Okay, yeah, plant. That's why I said I'm not getting into plant ID is one of my weaknesses. So I'm not getting. That's why I'm not talking about which plants we should grow.
Great.
That is not where my knowledge level is.
Okay, well, we'll let you go on now. Thank you.
Oops, I went the wrong direction. So mulch. I started off the presentation talking about what they do in Australia and Israel. And one of the big 3 things that they do, one is drip irrigation, because you're giving the water where it's needed, and then they can make sure that it goes deep. So that's getting water deep to the trees as opposed to a lot of surface water that runs off. So the other thing they do is mulch. And the big thing about mulch, I know in my yard, this is a picture of my yard. I have a few inch deep of bark chips, and you can get bark chips for free if you call up any of the tree places. They'll come over and they're always trying to get rid of all of the mulch they create. So you can get mulch. You don't even have to pay for it. And I have like 4 inches deep of mulch. And I can go in July and I have to dig down to the bottom of 4 inches deep and it's still damp down there. So wood is a wonderful insulator when it comes to water. So you put mulch on top of your yard, and you've just done one more way of protecting that water. Because now the water is, instead of those 4 inches being, we're losing the water, it's protecting the water and keeping it in the earth. So it reduces evaporation. One note with mulch is make sure that you protect your trees from mulch. You never want to have mulch go directly up against the trunk of your tree, because that's skin. The surface of the tree to the tree, it's the skin of the tree. So just think about it. If you had a pair of damp socks, you'd be fine for a couple hours. A week of wearing damp socks and your feet would be a mess. Same thing with a tree. A week of having something damp against the bark, and the tree's going to start having problems. Maybe not a week, maybe it will take longer, but trees do not want to have mulch sitting right next to their bark. You need to give it some breathing room. The same way your feet need breathing room, or any of your skin needs breathing room, trunks of trees need breathing room. So when they say mulch, there's 2 different things we're talking about. One is mulch that I'm showing you right now, a picture of tree bark. The other one is oh God, a word just escaped me. I have a mulch and compost. Gosh. So the other one is compost. So the difference, and a lot of people refer to compost as mulch because you'll mulch, you'll put compost on top. The difference between compost and mulch is compost has a lot more nutrients. So if we're going to look for a good compost as opposed to a mulch, if you go to the nursery, what you want to look and see is if they have chicken or horse or manure in it, because you want the nitrogen. One of the things that you want to avoid is if they say the mulch or the compost is made from woodland products. Typically what that means is it's ground up pellets, wood pellets. So which has no nutrients. So what you want to have is at least 40%. Typically it's either chicken or horse manure, so that you have the nutrients to put into your soil. So the difference between mulch and compost is one has a lot more nutrients. And that's what you want to put around the plants, so all of those good nutrients get down to your plant, to the roots. Where mulch is great because it holds in the water. So that's the difference between the two. Another thing that people are using these days to hold in the water, it's called Hugelberms. And Hugel is hill in German. And what a Hugelberm is, a lot of people are creating Hugelberms when they redo their yard, because they'll have a tree or old trees or old big bushes that they take out. And what you can do is you can chop them up, and you can see by this picture, we chop them up, and the larger pieces on the bottom, the smaller pieces on the top. You fill it in with dirt. You cover that dirt with compost, and then you plant right into the compost. And what that does is trees retain a huge amount of water. They're like a sponge. So over the winter, these dead tree trunks in the Hugelberm retain a huge amount of water. And then the plants have some that are now planted on the berm now have access to this water. So that's how forests work. With all the trees, when they fall down, they create a water source, and we can create those same water sources in our yards. So if you're looking at redoing your yard, one of the things that's really a good idea is, instead of paying to have old trees or old bushes taken off, use those trees, cut them up, and use them to create the berms in your yard. And eventually, you can see the picture here, after a number of years, they will collapse, they'll get smaller. So if you start off with a 4-foot berm, you might end up in 20 years with a 2-foot berm. And if you open it up, you probably won't see much tree left. But what you'll have is great compost. So that's another way, we want to create water sinks and get rid of the heat sinks. So another form of water sink is a rain garden. And rain gardens, what you do is you create a depression, usually 2 to 3 feet in your yard, and you fill it up with rocks. And that way, during the winter, the water comes and it has some place to go, as opposed to skirting along the surface and running into the streets. One of the things that we want to do is we want to save our aquifers. And we have a lot of problems in this area because we have so much coverage. We have streets and we have houses. So those all, before we had streets and houses in Santa Clara County, all the water that hit the ground went down into our aquifers and refilled our aquifers. Now, so much of it runs off, it runs into the street, goes down into our sewer system, and goes out to the bay. And we want to keep as much water from going out to the bay as we possibly can. We want that water to percolate down and replenish our aquifers. So what's nice about rain gardens is it allows a lot more water. Instead of running out into the street, it's 30% more water will actually soak into the ground. and it removes the nutrients and the chemicals from rainwater runoff. So they're creating the dry creek beds are a real benefit in our area, and there is a $300 Valley water rebate for creating one, because that's what the water district wants. They want more water in our aquifers, so they're paying people to create rain gardens.
Anita, we have a good question about the rain garden idea. Do we really get enough water to make a rain garden worth it? And then the follow-on question is, do all the rocks that people are using for these rain gardens actually contribute to our urban heat island effect?
I don't know about the heat island effect. I do know that because typically when it rains here, one of the big problems we have is sheeting with rain. It comes down, the earth can't necessarily accept all of it, so what it does is these are great ways of capturing water. So it does, according to Santa Clara Valley Water District, it does make a huge difference. And it might be that most of the year we don't have any rain, but when we do have it, we want to be able to collect as much as we possibly can. And it is one way of being able to collect a lot of water.
Okay, great, thanks.
So another area that we have that we don't think about is our roofs. Our roofs are typically the largest structure on our property, and they are a huge heat sink. They don't only heat up our house, they heat up our yard. There was a study done in Southern California, I believe it was UC Riverside, and they wanted to see how much cooler it was if you used a cool roof as opposed to a traditional roof, how much lower your utility bills were. And what they were shocked by was how much lower people's water bills were. Because if you have a heat sink, it evaporates all the water around it. So if you have a roof that's a heat sink, your entire yard is going to use more water, because it's going to be, all that heat is going to be, it's going to be evaporating the water. And when people put down a cool roof, their water bill goes down because the water isn't getting evaporated. So when you're looking to get a roof, one of the elements of every roof is solar reflection. And what you want is solar reflection higher than 25%. It's now a state law in Southern California to buy a cool roof. You can't buy a traditional roof. And what a cool roof is if it's an asphalt, it's reflective. So white roofs are reflective. Metal roofs, you get checked to make sure that they're a reflective metal roof. They can tell you. An asphalt roof. So what they now do is your asphalt, this is a picture of my roof. I put a cool roof on a couple of years ago. The asphalt roofs, instead of putting sand on top of the asphalt, they now have a reflective material that they put on. And personally, we found that our house stayed cooler. So, when you have those like 3-4 days in a row, the first day in a row, we don't have air conditioning. The first day when it's hot, my house doesn't get hot at all because I have nice insulation. By about day 3 of a hot spell, my house just, in the evening, it doesn't get a chance to cool off. So the house starts getting really hot. When we put in the cool roof, it's easily about 10 degrees cooler in the house by day 3 than it was previously. So it does make a difference in keeping your house cool in the winter. In the summer. So, and what they found is the cool roof cut air conditioning by 7 to 15%, and they cut outside watering by at least 9%. So if you're looking at putting a new roof, you should consider. And one of the elements they talk about when you're looking at the specifications for a roof, they'll say the solar reflection. And what you want is higher than 25%. You can get 40 to 50%, but a lot of people in Northern California don't like the colors, because the colors for something as high as 45 to 50% are typically white and cream and a very, very pale gray, green. And we care about the aesthetics of our homes.
We have a couple questions about cool roofs.
Sure.
One of them is there any way you can retrofit a traditional roof to make it into a cool roof or add on?
Put down new cool roof asphalt. So no.
No, there's not. Okay, you have to, it has to start fresh.
Yeah, yeah.
And then
so it's one of those things when you're looking to put a new roof in, be aware that there's cool roofs and they're not more expensive.
how do cool roofs handle the winter time?
Same. We've, the thing with the winter is we have the heat in our house, and insulation is what we use so that it doesn't leave our house. The problem that we have in the summer is we have the heat baking down, and after about 3 days, no matter how much insulation you have, it's just so hot in your roof that your house starts getting super hot. So what it does is it reflects the heat, so your house won't heat up as much.
Great, thank you.
So you think where the heat source is coming from. In the winter, the heat source is coming from the inside and you want to keep it inside. In the summer, it's coming from the outside and you want to keep it outside. So another system that we should be looking at is gray water. So with gray water, what we're doing is we're taking like from our washing machine water and we're saving it. And instead of using water from our hose, we use water from our washing machine to water our plants. And Santa Clara County has a $200 to $400 gray water laundry to landscape rebate program. So they also want you to be reusing gray water. So I haven't done this yet. It's a great idea. I just haven't implemented it at my house. So that's my presentation. So to summarize is we want to cut water usage, drip irrigation, mulch, and proper watering techniques. And when we want to save water by replacing our lawns, by storing water, by creating water sinks, and by eliminating heat sinks or minimizing heat sinks. So any questions?
Let's see, right now, we need to ask if anyone has any more questions, please go ahead and type them into the chat. Diane did say that she put a cool roof on and she said that the roofer can also adhere a rolled on material over existing roofs that has higher reflectivity and emissivity. So that's good.
Oh, that's great.
Cool.
I didn't know that.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Let's see, someone says, Hugelberms, can they be installed on the tree's crown line? I think the idea is that the tree is dead, right? That you've chopped it down.
Yeah, it's a dead tree. So when you're pulling out these dead trees, you cut them up, and instead of having them hauled away, you line them up, like you're creating a berm in your yard. Instead of just having a flat grass area, you're going to create a berm. Use your dead trees to create that berm. You cut up trees, and it becomes a water sink.
We have a couple questions about gray water. I don't know if you feel comfortable answering them, but we can sure talk about them.
We can talk about it. I don't know how comfortable I feel answering them.
That people are worried about the effect of detergent on plants, and then someone else is worried about the effect of the microplastics in the laundry, like in the lint. I don't know the answers to either of those.
Yeah, I don't know the answers either. And I don't know how much microplastics we're getting out of our water, even the Santa Clara water system gets out. I don't have the, I'm sorry, I just don't know.
The Santa Clara Valley Water does have a lot of information about gray water on their website. I do know that. Let's see. Do you have any suggestions for Waterwise ground cover plants? I know you said you're not a plant advisor, but anybody, anything particular that you would like to recommend people try?
Yeah, I'm not the one to ask. There's so many good master gardeners that can give you lists of names. I'm not one of them. What I can recommend is there's some great information over at the UC site. So if you put in, like UC Davis into your search engine, you put UC Davis and you put in ground cover and, California native ground cover, they'll take you to a page that probably has 20 to 30 different plants.
Yes, the UC Davis Native All-Stars is a wonderful list.
Yeah, that's what I was trying. Couldn't remember the name of they have fantastic lists over at that site.
And the California Native Plant Society, of course, too. I'm just looking back through the list for any additional questions. Oh, Diane just posted a huge list of sources. Great, thank you, Diane. A clarification on the water sink idea. Does it need to be put in a certain way so that mosquitoes don't breed in it, or is the water absorbed into the ground?
Yeah, I don't believe that it becomes a mosquito problem because you're digging a hole about 3 feet deep and then filling it with rocks. So that just gives it gives the water plenty of surface to be able to go down, but to sink down. And the mosquitoes, when we have rain, is not when we have mosquito season. So mosquitoes, we have mosquitoes in the summer, and that's not when we have rain. So you don't even have to worry about those issues.
That's a really good point. When you implement all these water saving techniques, do you still need the 1 inch of water per week?
For your plants, yeah. If you instituted all of those and you're using, it's all California natives that you have in your yard, and you have mulch and all of that. No, you're not going to need the 1 inch per week because you have plants that don't need to be watered. But if you're going to have a vegetable garden, then you're going to need that 1 inch per foot per week.
Right. And then we do have a question about growing native plants. Should you just water them the first year?
Yeah.
They do need to be watered.
They do need to be watered the first year to establish them.
At the least, yes, definitely.
Yeah, 1 to 2 years. But once they're established, it's always those. And you also want to start with smaller plants. A lot of people say, well, look at what the great big plant I bought. And they've actually done studies where you buy a little plant and you plant it next to the great big plant. And in about 5 years, that little plant is bigger than the great big plant. Because the little plant is now growing its root system unencumbered, as opposed to the bigger plant was in a pot. And now it has to learn how to grow unencumbered.
That's
So
interesting.
there's if you're interested in all of that, there's a woman out of Washington, University of Washington, Linda Chalker Smith. She's come into Master Gardeners and spoken to us a few times about
I know
urban
her.
planting.
Right.
And her big recommendation is if you're going to be planting trees, bare root trees are the best. So you want to be planting your trees bare root like in January, February. We're kind of a little late for bare root right now. And you want to plant small trees because they grow much. You plant a big tree and a small tree right next to a baby tree and a medium-sized tree, and you paid, $20 for the baby tree, and you paid $500 for the medium-sized tree. And in 5 years, that baby tree is going to be bigger than the medium-sized tree. And healthier.
That's really good information. And it'll save you money because the little tree is cheaper.
Right, a lot cheaper. And you plant the little tree and, it will take a few years for it to get bigger, but it's being planted and now it thinks this is their native soil. And it's not pot bound at all. The roots aren't pot bound. The root, where the big tree, it's already gotten used to growing a certain way, the roots. So it's much harder for its roots to acclimate. to your soil?
We've had a couple of fairly complicated questions about irrigation layouts and that kind of thing.
Yeah,
I
and
think
probably not the
we
person
probably
to talk
will
to.
not be able to deal with those.
Yeah.
One last question. How do you water wisely for a 20-year-old redwood tree?
Well, it probably doesn't need to be watered wisely because it's native. And native trees, a redwood tree, it's native. The biggest issue I see with redwood trees in Santa Clara County is people planted them, and redwood trees like to be with their sisters. So if you go up into the hills, like I love to go over to like Wonderlick Park, which is in San Mateo County, and they have all of these what they call fairy circles where they have the redwood trees, and there's probably 10, 15 redwood trees in a circle, the sisters. And that's what redwood trees like. They create their own atmosphere. And if it's just a redwood tree, if you're saying my redwood tree is distressed and it's not growing well, how close is it to other redwood trees? And if you say, well, it's the only one and there's no redwood tree near it, that's your problem, is redwood trees like to live in groves. And they're very unhappy if they're not in a grove. If we're talking about our native coast redwood trees. And we don't need to water our native coast redwood trees because they're used to this environment. And a lot of times you'll see these redwood trees that are standing on their own, the lower down, probably the lower 20, 30 feet, they're very healthy looking, and the top is where they look terrible. And the reason is because there's other trees near them. So they don't like to be on their own.
They do like to be in a grove, don't they?
They like to be in a grove. That's where they're happiest.
Well, it looks like we're running out of questions.
Okay.
I think you've done a fantastic job. Thank you very much for your talk.
My pleasure.
I don't know if Rosalind from the library wants to say goodbye to folks. But let's just say thank you very much to the
Yes.
Santa Clara County
She's
Library
there.
District.
Rosalind's there.
Oh, hi. Yes, thank you all very much for attending, and I will be following up with the recording and, of course, the inevitable book list as soon as I get the recording from the Master Gardeners. So that's all. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night.